blast erupted from inside a Huawei lab in China. It's part of the telecom giant's research center relating to smartphone and 5G equipment. China's farmland has been hit by a series of natural disasters, but authorities still say a bumper crop is certain. Farmers have their doubts. Chinese media reports touting the success of China's vaccine trial, but upon closer inspection, Chinese media misquoted the WHO official. A Chinese textbook rewrites a Bible story. It claims Jesus killed a woman and said he, too, is a sinner. This comes as China and the Vatican are expected to extend a deal. And Russia, China, and the U.S. swap accusations over the global pandemic response, that during the UN Security Council meeting. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. First, we turn to an explosion in China's southern Guangdong province. The blast reportedly erupted from inside a Huawei lab on Friday. Located in Dongguan City, the building served as a research center for the telecoms giant. According to Chinese media, about $1.5 billion had been invested into the center. It was intended to fund mobile phone development research. The area hit by the explosion included labs conducting materials research and part of a manufacturing complex for precision components. It's responsible for outputting 120 million mobile phones per year. According to a Reuters report, the lab also conducts testing for 4G and 5G antennas. An insider from the research center told us that the area is also home to the facility's core confidential area and is not accessible to most staff. According to the local fire department, the building that caught fire was constructed with a steel structure. Firefighters explained that the fire mainly destroyed sound absorption material. No casualties have been reported, although we cannot independently verify the figure. After the explosion, the city's propaganda department at first denied that the blast had come from the lab. Instead, it claimed the building had been under construction and not in use. But videos posted on Chinese social media showed crowds of people fleeing the building after the blast, some of them wearing lab coats. Chinese state-run media later admitted that the explosion did come from the lab. The cause of the incident remains unclear. Huawei was not immediately available for comment. Unusual weather and climate patterns have been plaguing China nationwide, causing particular damage to the country's agriculture. Heavy rainfall has caused massive flooding, while disasters like mudslides led to destruction in other areas. But China's agriculture minister says this autumn's crop will be unusually productive. The statement has left farmers with more questions than answers.
According to a new report in Chinese state-run media, China's agriculture minister Han Changfu said that China's autumn grain harvest this year is a foregone conclusion. He said the annual grain production is expected to increase. But Chinese farmers told us that crops have suffered heavy losses due to flooding. On top of that, farmland has been hit by locusts and bad weather such as hailstorms and typhoons.
The weather, the floods in the plains, the drought in the mountains, the price of most of the grain has gone up.
People have been storing food. It's impossible to believe the minister's words. Nowadays, the people are not fools.
Another farmer, Mr. Tan from Hunan province, said that rice farming has declined because it's not profitable. He said the price of grain has gone up by 25% in his area compared to last year, which indicates the grain harvest was not good.
The more important reason is that rice farming is not profitable, and so many people don't grow it. You have to believe the opposite meaning of the officials' words. They repeatedly emphasize the bumper grain harvest this year, which has never happened before. So I think it is very likely there will be problems with the grain harvest this year.
Reporting by Xiong and Chen Jie, NTD News.
Natural disasters aren't the only thing threatening China's grain supply. 2 suspects were recently sentenced to over 10 years in prison. That's for their involvement in a grain theft case. 24 others were charged with being accessories to the crime and also face punishment. The theft was first discovered last August. That's when a southern branch of the country's grain reserves group found over 400 tons of grain had gone missing. The missing seasonal reserves totaled a loss of nearly $150,000. The case exposed some major management loopholes in the corporation. Now, some are questioning whether there are moles in the operation. According to Chinese media outlet Inspection Daily, the grain thieves were able to get more money in exchange for less grain that they sold to the granary. They did it with the help of a remote-controlled device hidden in the granary's grain scale. Technicians found the foreign device on the scale circuit board. It can remotely change the scale's weight reading at will. Warehouse surveillance videos also show that last July, 2 men snuck inside the facility after midnight. There, they covered the security cameras and remained inside the building for around half an hour. Later, the thieves invited farmers to sell grains to the facility, tempting them by saying they could add extra weight to the grain before selling it. Extra weight means more money for less grain. Surveillance videos also showed 3 men were often present when certain farmers came to sell grain. They could be seen using something inside their pockets, which was later verified to be the remote control used to adjust the digital scale. Within 6 days, the thieves added weight to over 80 truckloads of grain, around 5 tons each. Chinese media reports say the corporation has since ruled out the possibility of a mole. But netizens question the statement, some asserting that tech crimes depend on insiders. One comment reads, "There's a leader behind those arrested who hasn't been arrested yet. How else would a few amateurs know about the surveillance inside the granary?" Chinese authorities have changed the ending of a Bible story. The adjustment claims Jesus is a sinner and even that he killed a woman. This as China is about to renew a deal with the Vatican. NTD's Juliet Song has more on that.
China and the Vatican are reportedly about to renew a historic deal. That's as a Chinese textbook has been found to paint Jesus as a murderer. In the original Bible story, a woman was about to be stoned for committing adultery, but Jesus stepped in, pardoning her sin and letting her go. But the Chinese textbook describes a different ending. It says when the crowd receded, Jesus stoned the woman to death, saying, "I too am a sinner," But if the law could only be executed by men without blemish, the law would be dead. The textbook is used by vocational school students. It teaches professional ethics and law and has been approved by a review committee under China's education ministry. The discovery comes as the Chinese regime and the Vatican are reportedly about to extend a deal. It was signed 2 years ago and allows both Beijing and the Pope to appoint bishops in China. China is home to about 12 million Catholics. They're split into 2 groups, state-run and underground. Pastors in the country's state-run associations are appointed by the communist regime. State-run associations reject the Pope's authority, while underground Catholics recognize it and are often persecuted for it. But under the deal, the Pope has final say about the appointment of bishops in China and is recognized as the leader of the Church. After it was signed, the Pope also recognized 7 clergies previously ordained by the communist regime. Some conservative critics consider the approval a sellout to the communist regime. The deal is about to expire next month, and U.S. is calling the Vatican to abandon it. In an editorial, Pompeo wrote that human rights conditions for religious believers have deteriorated amid the deal. He cited an example of a Chinese Catholic who was beaten and taken into custody for refusing to join the state-run church. On Twitter, Pompeo also wrote, "The Vatican endangers its moral authority should it renew the deal." He's expected to visit the Pope at the end of this month. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News.
The U.S., China, and Russia exchanged strong words at Thursday's UN Security Council meeting. The U.S. ambassador to the UN criticized the Chinese Communist Party for the cover-up that she said transformed a local epidemic into a global pandemic.
The world's scientists still do not have a complete understanding of the origins, characteristics, and spread of the virus, an understanding that only the Chinese Communist Party can provide.
UN Ambassador Kelly Craft took aim at China and the World Health Organization at the UN Security Council meeting, saying the WHO assisted the Chinese regime in lying to the world. The WHO parroted China's narrative that the virus was not contagious at the beginning of the outbreak. Even despite warnings from Taiwan in late December that it may not be the case. The WHO also opposed bans on travel to China.
There is no reason for measures that unnecessarily interfere with international travel and trade.
The Chinese ambassador responded with angry replies, accusing the U.S. of mishandling its own control of the virus.
I must say, enough is enough. You have created enough troubles for the world already. The U.S. is now standing against the international community and completely isolated. It's time to wake up. If someone should be held accountable, it should be a few U.S. politicians themselves.
The Russian foreign minister accused the U.S. of unfairly attacking the UN and praised the WHO for acting professionally and in a timely manner. South Africa criticized the U.S. for its sanctions on Iran. Niger called for reforms on climate change, and Tunisia and Indonesia warned of political rivalries in the international institution. The U.S. ambassador criticized the members for focusing on what she called political grudges rather than the pandemic.
You know, shame on each of you I am astonished and I'm disgusted by the content of today's discussion. I'm actually really quite ashamed of this council. Members of the council who took this opportunity to focus on political grudges rather than the critical issue at hand, my goodness. President Trump has made it very clear. We will do whatever is right, even if it's unpopular, because let me tell you what, this is not a popularity contest.
She said President Trump made the decision for the United States to withdraw from the WHO due to its lack of transparency and accountability. The U.S. was the WHO's largest funder. Kraft said the U.S. will shift its resources to other, more credible partners.
The West is calling out China for its suppression of Hong Kongers and the Uyghur ethnic group. The comments came during the United Nations Human Rights Council on Friday.
China is facing a rare rebuke. At the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, representatives from the European Union, Britain, Australia, and Canada called on China to restore basic legal rights in Hong Kong. They also demanded the regime open up to scrutiny over its Xinjiang region, home to the country's Uyghur Muslim ethnic group.
In the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region,
the national security law is being implemented with the apparent intention to eliminate dissent. It allows prosecution of certain cases in mainland China, a jurisdiction where defendants are often held for long periods without charge or access to legal counsel, and where we have concerns about judicial independence, due process, and reports of torture.
No state should be above the law. China's turn has come.
At the council, a Uyghur Muslim testified that his family is being held in a Chinese concentration camp. He urged the council to name a UN investigator for his native region. Chinese Representative Jiang Duan rejected the allegations, calling the West's human rights policies hypocritical. UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet said last week she was discussing a possible visit to Xinjiang with Chinese authorities.
FBI Director Christopher Wray warned on Thursday that Chinese hackers are still targeting U.S. companies, specifically their research relating to the CCP virus, including areas like testing, treatments, and vaccines. Wray testified to the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee about threats to the U.S. He said almost within days after a U.S. company or research institution announced progress, cyber attacks tied to China would follow. He described it as very aggressive activity, adding that China is the nation's greatest counterintelligence threat. Now we take a look at some Chinese reports about vaccines. Earlier this week, a number of Chinese media outlets reported that the chief scientist at the World Health Organization said some of China's COVID-19 vaccine candidates proved to be successful in clinical trials. CGTN, the English version of the Chinese Communist Party mouthpiece CCTV, also published a news piece about it. But clicking on the CGTN article shows it has been deleted. On closer inspection, the translation was inaccurate. The WHO chief scientist actually said if some of China's vaccine candidates prove to be successful. But it was reported by Chinese media missing out the word if. 5 Republican senators are urging Netflix to reconsider plans to adapt a Chinese science fiction book trilogy into a TV series. They say the author has defended the Chinese regime's treatment of Uyghur Muslims.
5 Republican U.S. senators have urged Netflix to drop plans for a TV adaptation of a Chinese science fiction series. Lawmakers led by Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee take issue with the author of The Three-Body Problem, Liu Cixin, and his defense of China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims. Netflix announced earlier this month it would be turning the book and its 2 sequels into an English-language live-action TV series led by the creators of smash hit Game of Thrones. Liu is set to serve as a consulting producer. The senators pointed to Liu's comments in a 2019 interview in The New Yorker. He was asked about China's clampdown on Muslims in the Xinjiang region, where a United Nations report has estimated that around 1 million people, mostly ethnic Uyghurs, were detained in camps and subjected to ideological education. Liu was quoted as saying, "Would you rather that they be hacking away at bodies at train stations and schools in terrorist attacks? If anything, the government is helping their economy and trying to lift them out of poverty." The United States and human rights groups have criticized China's treatment of Uyghurs, but China's foreign ministry has repeatedly denied the existence of internment camps in Xinjiang, calling the facilities vocational and educational institutions, and accusing what it calls anti-China forces of smearing its Xinjiang policy. In their letter to Netflix, the senators said Netflix's decision to adapt The Three-Body Problem amounted to, quote, normalization of the Chinese government's crimes, and asked Netflix to seriously reconsider the implications of providing a platform to Mr. Liu in producing this project. Netflix had no immediate comment.
A TikTok challenge has led to an FDA investigation. On Thursday, the federal agency announced it is looking into reports of teens participating in the so-called Benadryl challenge. The over-the-counter medication is used to treat allergies. Teenagers in the challenge are encouraged to take large doses of the drug. According to the FDA, teens have reportedly ended up in emergency rooms with serious injuries, and some may have died. The FDA warns that taking too much Benadryl can lead to severe health problems, even death. It says it contacted TikTok and is urging the app to remove videos of the challenge from its platform. India is preparing for another skirmish at its border with China. New drills, part of the ongoing military standoff between the neighbors.
The drills took place at an air base in the Himalayan border region close to China and Pakistan. It is suspected that both China and Pakistan may come together against India. The Indian Air Force said it was ready for undertaking operations simultaneously on both fronts.
The Indian Air Force is fully trained and ready to undertake operations by day or night on both the fronts. The air warriors are fully trained and highly motivated, and we stand by the motto of Indian Air Force to touch the sky with glory.
Another pilot was asked about their capability to undertake night operations in these tough terrains. He said their warfare capabilities have increased a lot. He is confident they can undertake all types of missions from the forward base, even at night. The Indian Air Force is often performing drills at the Himalayan border. 20 Indian soldiers were killed there during violent clashes with Chinese troops in June.
The recent arrest of an NYPD officer acting as an illegal agent for the Chinese Communist Party has been garnering attention. His ties to the Chinese consulate raise concerns about how the Chinese regime spreads its influence overseas. through what's called the United Front Work Department. We sat down with the Epoch Times China editor Annie Wu to learn more. Hello, Annie. Thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you back on the show.
I'm glad to be here again.
So recently, an NYPD officer has been charged with acting as a spy for the Chinese regime. So what kind of agencies would employ such a person?
Yes, so the court documents show that the NYPD officer had handlers in the Chinese consulate in New York City. And according to prosecutors, his handler, one of them, is in charge of a United Front group called the China Association for Preservation and Development of Tibetan Culture. Now, on the surface, this name sounds great. It sounds like it's a wonderful organization, but this is actually one of the United Front groups operated by Beijing to essentially promote the agenda of the party.
So you mentioned the United Front work. So what is that?
Yes, United Front is a very broad term, and it actually encompasses many different government departments within the Communist Party, but essentially all of them seek to influence both people inside China and overseas to adopt what Beijing considers important for its goals and essentially stamp out any form of dissent against it. So in the West, that often includes business associations, so-called friendship associations or cultural groups.
So the United Front work basically tries to stamp out any dissent, as you mentioned, against Beijing. But what other places could you see that in action?
Yes, this is actually very common on university campuses. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has highlighted the issue of Confucius Institutes and Chinese student associations on campus that are pretty much influenced by the Chinese consulates to monitor students and make sure they toe the party line and don't voice any dissent against the Chinese regime. And there's also allegations that these Confucius Institutes and student organizations try to spy on students in order to make sure that they toe the line or potentially that they try to assist Beijing in their espionage or tech theft efforts as well.
So you mentioned Secretary of State Mike Pompeo stressing about the Confucius Institutes on American universities, which could be under the United Front work. So what are some ways we could protect ourselves against this kind of influence?
Well, yes, I think awareness about what these groups are and what they do is probably one of the most important things. Actually, Pompeo also highlighted this week in a speech the kind of potential threats of these organizations. He said that the State Department was probing into two specific United Front groups that operate in the United States. So we'll see what will happen after the State Department investigates them.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Annie. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Tiffany.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Explosions rocked Beijing overnight. 100 fire trucks showed up with helicopters hovering nearby. The timing is sensitive. A Chinese province with a population of 46 million is entering wartime status due to the CCP virus epidemic, while authorities only reported a dozen cases. Heavy rain and mudslides hit South China. Worries about food shortages are on the rise. In China, many company general managers have a second job, managing a local prison. A look into China's prison companies. And the U.S. is preparing to work with Taiwan to move supply chains out of China. The FBI liaison to Taiwan appeared for the first time at the Taiwan Bureau of Investigation's press conference. And Taiwan's representative to the U.S. updated her Twitter bio to say Taiwan ambassador to the U.S. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now to China's southwest. Authorities in Yunnan province on Saturday announced wartime status for the area. The declaration means that the entire province is required to fully enter wartime status and strengthen its border control. The announcement didn't detail what specific measures would be taken, but based on wartime status action in other regions, including Beijing, main tactics will likely include neighborhood lockdowns, the suspension of public transportation, highways and air travel, and the closing of shops. Last week, Yunnan's Ruili city was put under lockdown after 2 cases of the Chinese Communist Party or CCP virus were reportedly discovered there. As a result, over 200,000 Ruili citizens were made to take virus tests. A makeshift hospital was built with enough room to house nearly 1,000 patients. And at least 200 medical staff were sent there from a neighboring city. The harsh measures prompted questions about why officials pushed for such an extreme response if there were really only 2 confirmed cases in the area. When wartime status was announced for Yunnan province over the weekend, the situation there didn't appear serious either, at least according to official figures. The Yunnan Provincial Health Commission said that as of September 18th, there were only 9 symptomatic cases and 5 asymptomatic cases in the entire province. Yunnan province has a population of 46 million people. That's even more than California, the most populated state in the U.S. Zhang Wenhong, a virus expert from Shanghai, said over the weekend that a second pandemic wave in China this winter is inevitable. He added that 80% of patients will show no symptoms. According to Chinese locals we've spoken to, the pandemic has continued to spread across the country, following its peak months ago. That's despite state-run media reports and official numbers, which claim the country has seen few to no cases in recent months. Now we take a look at the flooding in China. The situation is getting much better than months ago, but in some areas it is still serious due to heavy rain not seen in decades. In the southwestern province of Guizhou, many areas suffered from heavy rain and mudslides in recent days. A parking lot collapsed. 3 cars had already washed away and 3 cars were still standing there, stuck on the crumbling earth beneath them. Houses submerged in water, roads turning into rivers. A car is seen drifting on the surface of the river. The man who shot the clip said he hasn't seen flooding like this in decades. In a village, over 80 houses were submerged in water. Only 6 houses were spared. This house has 3 floors. Now only half of the 3rd floor can still be seen. Many houses are completely underwater. Elderly locals said they have never seen floodwater reach this level in their whole lives. Rice fields are soaked in water. The person shooting the video said it seems the key words for next year will be food shortage. Now we take a look at Huashan village in this province, where according to locals, a nearby dam collapsed. Some houses were damaged and water came into people's homes. This video shows the scene after a mudslide. From September 13th to the 17th, heavy rain and landslides hit Miyi County in southwestern province of Sichuan. 2 days later, and the impact can be seen. A vast amount of stones and debris brought down from the mountainsides have washed over the village. Cars are buried, streets are covered. Even the schoolyard is under a thick layer of mud and stones. The villagers don't know where to begin in trying to clear it out. Now we turn to southern China. On Friday, heavy rainfall accompanied by lightning hit the coastal city Shantou. Heavy rain is usually not the only reason for the waterlog in Chinese cities. The low-quality flood drainage system is playing a big role too. Now to Beijing, where multiple explosions rocked 2 of the city's districts in the middle of the night. The blast struck just before midnight on Friday at the junction of the Sunyi and Tongzhou districts. Locals reported being woken up by the explosions, saying more than 100 fire trucks showed up soon after on the scene. Some wrote they also spotted helicopters hovering nearby. But later on, almost all related posts on Chinese social media were deleted by authorities. The next day, 12 hours after the blasts, local authorities claimed the accident was caused by a gas tank stored in the warehouse. They also emphasized that there were no casualties. But the sensitive timing of the incident triggered speculation online. October 1st is National Day in China. It marks the anniversary of when the Chinese Communist Party built up its regime 71 years ago. Now we take a look at China's financial sector. In China, officials refer to anything that could reflect poorly on the regime's reputation as having negative energy. As such, it's rare for authorities to allow local media reports about negative incidents, including bank runs. But on Friday, the answer to one journalist's question indirectly confirmed that bank runs did happen. Addressing the Consumer Protection Bureau of China Banking and the Insurance Regulatory Commission, a journalist mentioned rumors that bank runs had been happening in some areas since last year. The reporter asked the agencies to comment on the issue. In their answer, officials blame the problems on bank customers' lack of financial knowledge and accuse them of blindly following rumors. They even went as far to attribute it to the customers' advanced ages, implying that they are too old to act rationally. Officials called the bank runs unnecessary. Due to the Chinese regime's lack of transparency, we could only obtain information about 5 bank runs so far this year. Contrary to authorities' claims, there appear to be other reasons behind the bank runs. One bank's stock price recently plummeted. Another bank was reported to have broken the capital chain, and the bank's president went missing. The third bank's non-performing loan rate was reportedly on the rise. The fourth bank was listed as a dishonest institution by a court ruling. Lastly, the president of the fifth bank was put under investigation. The bank's revenue plummeted, and its major shareholders were also officially listed as dishonest persons. After each bank run, some customers were arrested and accused of spreading what authorities called rumors. In China, general managers of some companies have another job running the local prison. Their employees are no ordinary people either. They are inmates working inside their cells, including prisoners of conscience. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
It's been 4 years since Liu Jiying came to the U.S., but memories of working as a forced laborer in Chinese prisons still flash back from time to time.
At the maximum, each person had to wrap 10,000 chopsticks in one day. Those chopsticks would fill up a huge bag.
And it's not just chopsticks. She also knitted sweaters and scarves. 50 to 60 hours a week for 7 years, up until 2009. And Liu said prisoners have to meet their assigned quotas.
Some people were very slow when knitting sweaters, and they had to stay up all night finishing up the work. They couldn't go to sleep.
For all the work Liu did, she was paid less than $1 per month. She knew the products she made were for export, but it was unclear which country they were for, as the prison was very secretive about it.
The prison is very closed. Many things in there were kept secret, and you're not allowed to talk about it. Even eye contact wasn't allowed there, not to mention conversation.
Unlike other prisoners, Liu was sentenced for her spiritual belief. She practices Falun Gong, a spiritual meditation practice based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. The practice was immensely popular in China in the 90s. But in 1999, the regime imposed a strict crackdown and began to brutally persecute it. It's continued for over 2 decades. Inside the prison, even on days when Liu felt very weak, she was still forced to work.
For me, it was very hard. I was exhausted.
Liu was an element in China's vast prison system. In it, prisoners are used as forced labor to generate profit for the state. That includes prisoners of conscience like members of the Uyghur ethnic group and Falun Gong practitioners. In China, some company heads hold another job, management positions in a local prison. That's because many Chinese prisons have their own companies, and many of them are state-owned. For example, in China's southwest Sichuan, the vice chief of the bureau that oversees Sichuan's prisons is also the general manager of the prison's company. The company, called Sichuan Heqiang, has a range of services, from manufacturing clothing to dealing with real estate. The company has 43 subsidiaries, each belonging to a different prison in Sichuan, but it's not the only province where they're found. A 2019 human rights report found that the legal representatives of over 2/3 of China's prison companies are also the heads of their local prisons or prison bureaus. Under U.S. law, imports made by forced labor are illegal. But it's hard for foreign companies to do their due diligence when there's a lack of transparency. Prison labor is also common in China's supply chain. That's because the law demands that prisoners must work. Adult prisoners are forced to work 8 hours a day. Juliet Song, NTD News.
The relatives of 12 Hong Kongers detained in China are demanding information from Chinese authorities. They say they do not know the condition of their family member, nor are they allowed to meet with their lawyer.
The families of 12 Hong Kongers detained last month by Chinese authorities are calling for their right to use their own selected lawyers. The 12 were arrested on August 23rd for illegal entry into mainland Chinese waters. They were setting off from Hong Kong in a boat bound for self-ruled Taiwan. All were suspected of being involved in anti-government protests that erupted last year. 10 of the 12 had been charged and were released on bail and not allowed to leave the former British colony. Relatives of some of the detainees held a news conference outside the Hong Kong police headquarters to express their frustration with local authorities.
We have a lot of questions at the moment, so we urge Hong Kong police to do a thorough investigation of this case.
The relatives asked police to release details of the arrest and whether there were any injuries or casualties.
However, up to now, the lawyers appointed by the families have been refused to meet with the detainees. In other words, the conditions of the so-called arrested persons are still known only to the Chinese authorities.
Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam said the 12 were running away from the law and would have to be dealt with by mainland authorities, but she would provide feasible assistance.
Also in Hong Kong, professionals in Hong Kong appear to be losing faith in the city's legal system. A foreign judge serving on Hong Kong's highest court has just resigned. His decision was reportedly due to concerns over the new national security law in Hong Kong recently imposed by Beijing. Veteran Australian judge James Spiegelman is one of the 14 foreign judges on Hong Kong's highest court. Spiegelman told Australia's national broadcaster that he had resigned for reasons related to the content of the national security legislation. He did not elaborate further. Both local and international legal circles have expressed alarm over Beijing's imposition of the security law, many fearing it will erode the former British colony's democratic freedoms. Amid Beijing's efforts to regain control of the region, Western countries have begun to express more and more support for democratic Hong Kong. Recently, the US and UK have both taken new actions, clearly expressing their distrust of the Chinese regime. The U.S. government last week urged citizens to reconsider travel to China, including to Hong Kong. The notice cited both the CCP virus concerns and what was referred to as arbitrary enforcement of local laws. The notice also added that Beijing unilaterally and arbitrarily exercises police and security power in Hong Kong. Likewise, the UK also issued a travel advisory for China last week, warning that Britons who travel there may be at risk of arbitrary detention. So far, Chinese authorities have detained several foreigners for what Beijing calls endangering national security. A Taiwanese official said the U.S. and Taiwan will soon hold economic dialogues at a senior level. That's after a senior U.S. State Department official met local business leaders on the island last week. An expert says the U.S. is preparing to work with Taiwan to move supply chains out of China.
The U.S. and Taiwan will soon begin formal talks about their business ties. That's according to Taiwan's Minister of Economic Affairs. She announced the plan following U.S. Undersecretary of State Keith Krach's visit to the island last week. Krach is the second high-profile U.S. official to visit Taiwan within 2 months.
Our communication with the U.S. State Department is a very important step. And step by step, we can deepen the cooperation between the U.S. and Taiwan on different issues.
The official said that in a closed-door meeting, the two sides discussed issues including 5G, the reconstruction of supply chains, Indo-Pacific strategy, and more. The U.S. official met with Taiwan's president as well as local business leaders, like the founder of Taiwan's Semiconductor Manufacturing Corp, or TSMC, Morris Chang. TSMC is a major chip supplier for Apple, and before the U.S. imposed sanctions, Huawei. Earlier this year, it announced a $12 billion investment to build a U.S. manufacturing plant in Arizona. The factory would bring in over 1,600 jobs. The Taiwanese chip producer also has factories in mainland China.
During his visit, Kroc may persuade Taiwan to move the semiconductor industry clusters to the U.S. That is, the upstream and downstream industries of TSMC, the entire industry cluster instead of just one factory.
Taiwanese economist Wu Qialong said the U.S. sees it as a bigger effort to work with Taiwan to move important supply chains out of China.
The restructuring of supply chains is the main issue he is here to discuss. It would be best if these manufacturing supply chains can move out of mainland China to the U.S. Otherwise, they should at least move out of China.
He said other than the semiconductor industry, the U.S. may push toward moving its medical supply chain out of China and into Taiwan, and encourage Taiwan's petrochemical industry to invest in the U.S.
We know that in mainland China, about 80% of their top 10, top 20 export companies are actually owned by Taiwanese businesses. They use mainland China as a base for product processing and then export the products. If they want to move the supply chain out of mainland China, the main player here are these Taiwanese businesses.
Taiwanese media reported that the U.S. official invited about 30 Taiwanese business leaders to meetings. 2 of them rejected the invitation.
Because they have a lot of business in China, the majority of their businesses are in China, they are scared of the Chinese Communist Party and so didn't dare to attend the meeting. So this proves to Keith Kroc that the pro-Beijing business groups in Taiwan still haven't been dealt with.
Beijing has been accused of infiltrating Taiwan through buying up Taiwanese media companies for positive coverage and using Taiwanese business groups to lobby for pro-Beijing policies. The Taiwanese government passed an anti-infiltration law earlier this year to counter Beijing's influence. The authorities have also been providing subsidies to encourage Taiwanese businesses to move their factories from mainland China back to Taiwan. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
In a significant move, the FBI liaison to Taiwan, Nicholas Garcia, thanked Taiwan for helping in the crackdown against a global hacking campaign by Chinese hackers. Garcia also appeared for the first time at the Taiwan Bureau of Investigation's press conference last Friday, signaling further cooperation between the two countries. This after the U.S. Justice Department announced charges against 5 members of a Chinese hacking group. They're alleged to be behind cyber attacks on 100 companies and government institutions globally. The group is known as APT-41 or Barium Winti, Wicked Panda, or Wicked Spider. The 5 hackers were indicted in separate grand juries in August last year and this year. They remain at large. The Taiwan Bureau Director General said at a press conference his bureau discovered the hackers' ties to the group after getting reports in May that 3 Taiwan-based firms were under cyber attack. After detailed investigation, the Bureau found the hackers used a relay station in the U.S. They passed the information on to the FBI, which led to the recent crackdown and indictments. The hacking group is suspected of having close ties to the Chinese regime, particularly to public security officials. The U.S. Department of Justice Deputy Attorney General last week called out the Chinese regime for not working with U.S. prosecutors in tracking down the hackers. The U.S. has upped its pressure recently against threats from abroad, including charges against other Chinese hackers in July, targeting virus vaccine research firms. And Taiwan's representative to the U.S., Xiao Meiqing, caused a media uproar over the weekend after she updated her Twitter bio to say Taiwan ambassador to the U.S. The U.S. currently does not have formal ties with the democratic island after severing them in 1979 in order to recognize the Chinese regime. An ambassador rank would signal formal ties between the U.S. and Taiwan, which would trigger already tense relations between Washington and Beijing. Xia clarified in a post, saying, "Sorry to disappoint so many supporters, but Taiwan ambassador is what many call me and also my job description. My title remains Representative, Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office when engaging with the U.S. government." She added the work she does is no different from other embassies. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen told reporters on Sunday that no matter what Xiao's title was, she would continue to work hard for the island. President Trump says his administration won't approve the sale of TikTok to Oracle and Walmart if China's ByteDance maintains any control. On Saturday, he said the proposed deal severed ties to China and he gave it his blessing.
Over the weekend, President Trump said he approved a partnership deal in principle that would allow TikTok to operate in the United States. Under the agreement, TikTok's Beijing-based parent company, ByteDance, will create a new company headquartered in the United States, which promises to bring 25,000 jobs. Trump's August 14th executive order gave ByteDance 90 days to sell TikTok, but Saturday's deal is structured as a partnership, not a divestment. Oracle would hold a 12.5% stake and Walmart would hold a 7.5% stake in the company. 4 out of 5 board members would be American. ByteDance would still reportedly hold an 80% ownership of the company. But given that American investors own about 40% of ByteDance, an unnamed source told Reuters it could be described as majority American owned. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States is to review any deal before it can go through. Last week, the Commerce Department banned U.S. app stores from carrying TikTok starting Sunday. But because the president initially approved the deal, they postponed the start date until this coming Sunday.
A judge in San Francisco is blocking President Trump's ban on WeChat downloads for now. On Sunday, the federal judge temporarily blocked Trump's executive order to shut down the app. The Commerce Department had issued restrictions against both TikTok and WeChat, citing national security concerns. The Justice Department argued that WeChat users could switch to other apps or platforms, but the judge said the ban represents a violation of free speech, and the Trump administration didn't provide enough evidence to address national security concerns. The judge said there are other ways to complete such a ban, like barring WeChat from government devices. The Chinese Communist Party has launched a system to sanction foreign companies deemed harmful to Chinese interests. China's Commerce Ministry says it will target foreign firms that endanger China's sovereignty and security. NTD's Patrick Hayden spoke with a Chinese finance expert to see what's behind the move.
The Chinese regime has issued rules on its proposed unreliable entities list, which enables it to sanction foreign companies. Chinese finance specialist Frank Tianshi says the Chinese Communist Party is trying to show that they're still in control.
But if you look at the Chinese list, it's kind of ironic. It's just insane because they really want to do business with America. They want those American companies to either sell their technology to China or have the production or have the products sold in China.
The move comes one day after the US announced it would ban TikTok and WeChat. He thinks that we shouldn't underestimate the scale of what's going on as tensions rise.
The Chinese economy is really in trouble, deep water right now. So they need everything. They need the American market, and they need American technology, and they need foreign capital.
He says China is also reacting to improving relationships between the US and Taiwan.
They notice that the U.S.-Taiwan relationship is really rising fast, escalating fast.
He said internally in China there is a lot of pressure between two main factions within the CCP to demonstrate that China is not America's puppy dog. So the move is partly to demonstrate some strength internally in the government and also to the Chinese people. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. The U.S. is set to ban TikTok and WeChat this Sunday, and if other Chinese-based apps raise the same national security concerns, they will face the same fate. U.S. sanctions not only hit Huawei's mobile phone productions hard, but are likely affecting Chinese passenger plane manufacturers due to a lack of key components. A Chinese pro-democracy poet and his wife were arrested. Their 4 young children are under house arrest with their grandma. Nobody is allowed to visit them. The father of a Chinese American was denied entry to the U.S., possibly due to his membership of the Chinese Communist Party. And concern is rising that China could start using hybrid warfare. We sat down with the host of Crossroads, Joshua Phillip, to learn more about those risks. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now we turn to Taiwan. That's where U.S. Undersecretary of State Keith Krach had a closed-door meeting with Taiwan's Vice Premier and Minister of Economic Affairs on Friday. Talks focused on economic ties and new trade dialogues. He also had dinner with President Tsai Ing-wen. The meetings came as part of the U.S. officials' second day visiting the island. China had earlier announced combat drills and denounced what it called collusion between Taiwan and the United States. During the U.S. visit, Taiwan's defense ministry wrote on Twitter that 18 Chinese fighter jets had crossed the midline of the Taiwan Strait and entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone. It explained that Taiwan's air defense scrambled the fighters and deployed its air defense missile system to monitor the activities. Beijing claims the democratic island is part of its territory, but Taiwan staunchly maintains its independence. Before Krach set off for the island on Wednesday, Congressman Tom Tiffany introduced a bill calling on the Trump administration to abandon the One China policy and resume formal relations with Taiwan. In the 70s, as the U.S. built up diplomatic relationships with Communist China, it cut off official relations with Taiwan. One of Taiwan's neighbors also appears to want to strengthen ties with Taiwan. Japan's former Prime Minister Yoshiro Mori arrived in Taipei on Friday, ahead of a memorial ceremony for former Taiwan leader Lee Teng-hui. Mori met with Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen and expressed greetings from Japan's new Prime Minister Suga.
We treasure and share the same values and concepts of freedom, democracy, and free economy with Taiwan. Just as you said, I hope that we and our governments will make a joint effort to push for further development of our two countries in all fields.
According to Taiwan's Central News Agency, Japan's new prime minister plans to speak with Taiwan's president. If it happens, it would mark the first time since the two countries cut off their diplomatic relationship about 50 years ago. President Trump is set to ban the Chinese-based apps TikTok and WeChat this Sunday. His administration cites national security concerns as the reason for blocking the apps. And additional bans will be put in place if other apps show the same illegal behavior.
The Trump administration will block Americans from accessing WeChat and TikTok starting Sunday at midnight, citing national security concerns. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo addressed the move during a visit to Guyana.
Our goals are really very straightforward. Protecting American information data from ending up in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party.
WeChat will be completely banned on Sunday, but Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says TikTok will stay intact until November 12th. Last month, the president gave TikTok's parent company ByteDance 90 days to divest its assets and submit to a full audit. If ByteDance doesn't get a deal by November 12th that complies with Trump's order, then it will be shut down. The two Chinese-based applications come under scrutiny for jeopardizing national security and the U.S. economy. The Commerce Department stated that WeChat and TikTok collect large amounts of data which may end up in the hands of the Chinese regime. That's because the apps are part of China's civil-military fusion and must cooperate with the intelligence service of the Chinese Communist Party. Both TikTok and WeChat collect user data, including network activity, location, and search histories. Ross said the ban combats the Chinese regime's malicious collection of Americans' personal data while enforcing U.S. laws and regulations. Several million people in the U.S. use WeChat. Some depend on the app to keep in touch with friends, family, and colleagues in China. A few people say they rely on the app for work and worship. They, along with the nonprofit U.S. WeChat Users Alliance, sued the administration over the ban, saying it violates their constitutional rights and stops their communication with China. The Justice Department said people who only use WeChat to share personal or business information between users would not be criminally liable. The ban is the latest in the Trump administration's efforts to counter Beijing's actions to undermine U.S. institutions and public security. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
Uber is planning to sell part of its $6.3 billion stake in ride-hailing company Didi Chuxing. It's an effort to raise cash. According to Bloomberg, Japanese conglomerate SoftBank is in talks about buying Uber's 15% stake in the Chinese company. Uber and SoftBank were not immediately available for comment. Didi said it had no comment on the report. Tab Food Investments is also weighing whether to sell its China business. According to Bloomberg, it has a value of more than $1.2 billion. Tab Food Investments is the largest global franchise of Restaurant Brands International Incorporated.
Você já ouviu falar na sua jornada milionária? Esse é o meu curso básico de finanças para quem é totalmente
Based in Turkey, it holds 50% stake in Burger King's Chinese operations and runs more than 1,200 Burger King outlets in more than 150 Chinese cities. Sources with knowledge about the matter say a sale would kick off as soon as next month. Likewise, U.S. foreign exchange broker Onda recently issued a notice to its customers in China, saying it will close all trading accounts belonging to Chinese customers on October 30th. Chinese financial expert Xi Ling told Radio Free Asia that the withdrawal of foreign capital is due to problems in the Chinese market. He added that China is strongly promoting household consumption, accelerating the withdrawal of foreign capital. Awanda is a leading company in the currency data and foreign exchange trading field. Last week, it announced it would permanently close its foreign exchange forum. The forum had been temporarily suspended for weeks before that. As early as mid-June of last year, Oanda issued a notice to suspend the acceptance of new customers in China. Existing customers would not be affected. Oanda explained that it needed to adjust its business in the country. Under pressure from the United States, the Chinese Communist regime removed some financial market barriers for foreign firms last year. But it has yet to stop the withdrawal of foreign financial companies. Sun Dali, a financial scholar at China's Hebei University, says the Chinese Communist Party's increased control of currencies has led to the withdrawal of foreign-funded companies. He added that China's economic vitality is gone. The U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution on Thursday. It denounces what it called anti-Asian rhetoric related to the pandemic, including China virus. The resolution passed 243 to 163. 14 Republicans voted yes, along with 229 Democrats. All of the no votes came from the Republicans. A Democratic representative introduced this resolution due to a surge of assaults on Asian Americans since the pandemic hit America. The resolution will not be sent to the Senate or to the White House to sign or veto. Representative Kevin McCarthy called the resolution a waste of time. He said he thinks the House should focus on bigger issues, such as how to compete with China. China's domestic passenger plane manufacturing project is experiencing significant delay. Experts say U.S. sanctions are likely to be the main reason.
As Huawei is running out of chips, the C919, referred to as the domestic big plane in the Chinese Communist Party propaganda, is also facing challenges in development and delivery. It's alleged to be made in China and is expected to compete with the Airbus A320 and Boeing 737. Since most of C919's key components are from the U.S., the CCP's big plane project is likely to be suspended due to U.S. sanctions. Beijing made the C919 an integral part of its Made in China 2025 initiative. Since 2008, the CCP's state-owned aircraft manufacturer, Comac, has been developing the plane largely in secret. Its first aircraft was scheduled to be produced in late 2015, but the first test flight did not take place until May 2017, and only 6 aircraft have been built for test flights so far. China Eastern Airlines will be the first customer of the C919, and a delivery date was officially announced as set for 2021. According to Radio Network Voice of America, or VOA, the founder of aviation industry analyst firm Indu Analytics said that the C919 relies heavily on the Western supply chain. He said delays in delivery are inevitable as the pandemic continues. CCP officials claim that the C919 has achieved a nearly 60% localization rate and will strive to reach 100%. However, VOA quoted the senior advisor from CSIS, Scott Kennedy, that the C919 is only nominally a domestic aircraft, because all the components that make it fly come from the supply chain in the West, especially the U.S. For example, its engine is from CFM International, a joint venture between General Electric of the United States and Safran of France. And its key systems, such as avionics, flight control, fuel, landing gear, etc., are using the mature technology from overseas, or are manufactured by Sino-foreign joint ventures. There are at least 7 U.S. firms in the list of C919's first-tier suppliers, Scott says that since the CCP is promoting military-civilian integration, the U.S. may re-examine whether technology provided to the C919 will help the CCP develop its military, and there would be a high probability of sanctions. Reporting by Xu Wenhui, NTD News.
Chinese dissident and poet Wang Zhang and his wife have been arrested. They've been charged with what authorities call inciting subversion of state power. Following their arrest, their 4 young children and Wang's mother were left under house arrest and police surveillance.
On Thursday, Wang Zhang met with his lawyers for the first time in the detention center of Chuxiong City in Yunnan Province. After learning that his wife was also arrested, he was extremely upset and expressed his concerns about their 4 young children. His lawyer stated that the authorities accused Wang of inciting subversion of state power after he was released from detention in 2015. The accusation is mainly based on his public remarks, media interviews, poems, articles, and performance art that support democracy and freedom and criticize the communist regime. In January this year, Wang and his family were forced by the authorities to leave Beijing and move back to his hometown. In May, Wang was arrested from his home. Wang's wife wrote on social media that more than 20 policemen went to their home. They first knocked him down, put handcuffs and a black hood on him before taking him away. They then took hold of Wang's wife, mother, and 4 children, causing his mother to faint and remain unconscious as Wang's wife was taken away by the police. She returned home at 4:30 in the morning the next day and found her children still waiting for her, crying when they saw her again. After she was taken away, her younger son hid behind a curtain for hours until his grandma regained consciousness and found him. Wang's wife appealed for her husband online and was arrested in June. Since then, their 4 children have been looked after by Wang's mother. Insiders said that due to financial difficulties, the 4-year-old twins cannot go to kindergarten. The 8-year-old girl is picked up by the police every day to and from school. The 4 children and their grandma are being guarded at home by many policemen. According to a recording on file provided by an insider, in July, a courier called Wang's friend, stating that a package could not be delivered and could only be delivered to the guard room outside the unit, and that the police signed for it.
The police did not allow me to go up. Did this family commit a major crime, or what's the matter? There are more than a dozen policemen downstairs here every day. It's been like this for 6 months.
Their relatives dare not visit them. Some of their friends want to visit them, but are not allowed by police. They mailed food and daily necessities to them. But then since July, the family were no longer allowed to receive any packages from outside.
Now we take a look at the Trump administration's possible ban on Chinese Communist Party members. It's still unclear if the U.S. will go through with it, but the potential is garnering attention via a new case. In a Friday tweet, U.S. legal advisor Zheng Chunzhu described receiving a consultation call from a Chinese woman. She said she was a naturalized American citizen. Her father had previously been released due to his being a member of the Chinese Communist Party. She explained that her father sought to enter the U.S. with a tourist visa on Friday but was denied entry. He was made to wait at the airport to be sent back to China. Deng also posted a chat message on Twitter suggesting that his consultant, the daughter, to tell her father to quit the CCP as soon as possible and submit the statement of withdrawal to the U.S. government. Since then, news of his case has gone viral. One netizen said it's best to repatriate all underground CCP members hidden in the U.S. I know of several in California. They're all American citizens, and they even claim to be Christians, but they still think about their retirement pensions from China and still pay their CCP membership fees. Another user wrote, "It's absolutely good news if it's true. Members and admirers of the CCP slander the U.S. all the time, portraying the U.S. as hell on earth. Why do such people still apply for immigration to this country? Why should the U.S. accept such people? Let them have their Chinese dream in China." Still another netizen saluted the U.S. action, expressing his opinion via a video clip worth 1,000 words. From Hollywood to academia to professional sports like the NBA, Beijing has managed to exert its influence across much of American society. Jan Jekielek, host of the Epoch Times program American Thought Leaders, sat down with Texas Senator Ted Cruz to discuss how the U.S. can build a strategy to counter that influence.
So, just about a year ago, I have to mention this, I was at the China Forum that the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation organized. You were giving a keynote, and I thought it was one of the more of the passionate, I guess, indictments of the Chinese Communist Party's war on religious liberty, I guess you could say. You mentioned the destruction of Christian churches and the persecution of Christians, the forced organ harvesting from the Falun Gong, the concentration camps for Uyghurs, up to 1 million people, and also actually the cultural genocide of Tibet, which is something that isn't mentioned a lot these days even. Where do you see things today? This was about a year ago you were talking about this.
They've only gotten worse. Although I do think the world has opened its eyes more. I think the most significant foreign policy consequence to come out of the coronavirus pandemic is going to be a fundamental reassessment of the United States' relationship with China and of the world's relationship with China. I have long believed that China is the most significant geopolitical threat facing the United States for the next century. That combating China's hostility, aggression, theft of intellectual property, espionage, propaganda is a whole of government endeavor, and it's striking. A year ago, there were a lot of people in Washington who were China apologists. A whole lot of Democrats and even some Republicans, that they looked at China and they just saw a buck to be made. They saw the massive Chinese market. And sadly, we see that with U.S. companies, we see that with Hollywood, we see that with sports leagues, where the Chinese market, they want so much that they're willing to do business with torturers and murderers. They're willing to turn a blind eye. They're willing to give the Chinese Communist Party the censor's pen. And I am grateful that people in Washington and across the world are starting to see the threat that the Chinese government poses.
You know, in that same speech, you referenced Ronald Reagan's famous line, you know, tear down that wall. What would you say about Hong Kong today, then?
Very much the same thing, which is let the people go. And the analogy to the Berlin Wall, I believe we need the same sort of comprehensive approach to China that Reagan led with regard to the Soviet Union. China and the Chinese government is the new evil empire. And that is a combination of all sorts of tools. Now listen, nobody in their right mind wants to see a shooting war between the United States and China. You've got two massive militaries, and you would see an enormous number of casualties if we actually got into a shooting war. It's worth pointing out, for the entirety of the Cold War, we didn't get in a shooting war with the Soviet Union. Rather, and Reagan understood this the best, we engaged in a systematic, comprehensive effort to shine a light, to use the power of truth, to use economic pressures, to use diplomatic pressures, and to use the incredible power of the American free enterprise system to defeat them and to bankrupt them.
Privacy has become an increasingly important issue, from TikTok to recent leaks about China's massive database on millions of global citizens. Concern is rising that the data could lead to hybrid warfare. We sat down with the Epoch Times senior investigative journalist and host of Crossroads, Joshua Phillip, to learn more about those risks. Hello, Josh. Thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you back on the show.
Hey, my pleasure, Tiffany. Good to be here.
So recently in the news a lot is the Zhenhua data leak, which has been impacting millions of people around the world, including in the U.S. So how big of an issue is this?
This is a very big issue. Actually, back in 2016, I wrote an exclusive story on this in Epoch Times, 4 years before it was leaked to the public. The Chinese Communist Party, it has this program in China called the Social Credit System, and they have a data bank on every single person. While my source back in 2016 revealed the CCP has extended that same exact database overseas. The United States, Canada, Australia, you name it. Different foreigners, people, whether you're an influencer or not, the Chinese Communist Party has you in their databases. And the Chinese Communist Party uses these to monitor people, to target people, and to go after Chinese dissidents. It's also part of their program, and they're expanding this program abroad, trying to build it in other countries, like they're doing under the One Belt, One Road initiative. This is the CCP exporting this high-tech totalitarianist system.
So how does that impact national security and the average American's own privacy?
Well, for national security, a few different ways. One, we can look, for example, the Equifax breach. We can look at the OPM breach, the Office of Personnel Management. Remember OPM, this was one of the famous breaches of the Chinese Communist Party. That was the security clearances of government workers, which means when you go on camera and you spill your guts and you say every bad thing you've ever done in your life, the CCP has that now. They know every dirty detail about every single politician, every single person who has a security clearance, and they can use that for blackmail or for other forms of targeting. It's a massive, massive national security threat. In addition to this, the Chinese Communist Party has a system of unconventional warfare. They call it unrestricted warfare, hybrid warfare, you name it. And this also ties directly into that.
So you mentioned hybrid warfare. Can you expand on that? What is it exactly?
Well, so there are a lot of different names for these types of warfare. People talk about asymmetrical warfare. It's kind of like unconventional warfare tactics. Hybrid warfare is a fancy way of saying using multiple forms of war in conjunction with each other. They also talk about short of war tactic. Again, this is just plays on different names of concepts. Short of war would mean you push the idea of a war. You push things right to the boundary of what would constitute war, what would cause a war, but you never cross that boundary. Countries like Russia, countries like, say, Iran and China, they do it to the United States all the time. The CCP's form of warfare, a lot of people call it unrestricted warfare. And what is this? It's a different way of thinking about war. Now, in America, we think of, bombs, guns, jets, planes, and so on. For the CCP, warfare is foreign investment. It's business. It's entertainment. It's Hollywood. It's ideology. It's the manipulation of the international legal systems. It's the subversion of the very systems that make a society function. Tying back to what they had during the Soviet Union, for example, in Russia, what they would call ideological subversion. Taking control of the different systems and institutions at the heart of a country and making them serve an opposite function or making them serve the interests of their own country. The Chinese Communist Party does this very actively.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Josh. Great to have you on the show.
Hey, my
Unexpected response to 9/11, Chinese netizens seem to have taken a harsh attitude toward the attack's anniversary, even condemning those who mourn for its victims. 3 explosions ripped through a restaurant in the coastal city of Zhuhai. Reports say 3 were injured, but it's unclear if anyone was killed. In an exclusive report, an internal document we obtained details how Chinese authorities were criticized for not destroying classified documents. China is turning to its playbook for economic downturn, building infrastructure. Chinese authorities are calling on the country's local governments to borrow and spend even more in order to boost the economy. That's as they are already suffering from a mounting debt crisis. And a well-known Chinese publisher is detained by Beijing police. Friends say her decision to speak out for Chinese dissidents prompted the arrest. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Today is September 11th. To honor the anniversary, the U.S. Embassy in China posted on Chinese social media on Friday local time. It included part of a statement from President Trump, mourning the victims who died on this day 19 years ago. It read, "This Patriot Day, we commemorate the lives of those who perished on September 11th, 2001. We pray for the families who carry on their legacies, and we honor the unmatched bravery of our nation's first responders. We also commend those who, in the days and years following the attack, answered the call to serve our country and continue to risk their lives in defense of the matchless blessings of freedom. The post received a huge response from Chinese netizens. Most left comments mocking the U.S., while others defended humanity as a universal value. One of them wrote, "The U.S. is too domineering. When its father is dead, it can mourn him by himself, but it wants all Chinese people to mourn with it." Another commented, "I wish you a September 11th every day." Another netizen responded, "Those cheering Chinese people are garbage. You've lost your qualifications to be a human," meaning to criticize Chinese people who support the West and mourn those who died on 9/11. But amid the onslaught of negative comments, one netizen shared a message of hope. "May the world be peaceful and free from terrorism. Please don't let the mentally handicapped people on Weibo violate the bottom line of basic human morality." Now to southern China. That's where a gas explosion was reported at a restaurant Friday morning in the coastal city of Zhuhai. Two more explosions followed the blast shortly after. According to local media, at least 3 people were injured. It's unclear if any casualties were suffered. Videos circulating online show thick smoke billowing out from the hotel after the first explosion. Locals were spotted watching the aftermath play out from the street. When the 2 secondary blasts went off, flames erupted from the shattered windows. Some shops and residential buildings nearby were also affected. Police are now investigating the cause. Recently, we obtained an exclusive internal report from the Chinese Inner Mongolia region. It indicates that the communist authorities concealed a lot of information about the CCP virus epidemic across a lot of documents. The report from a CCP inspection group criticized the local authorities for not destroying the classified documents in a timely manner. It was a routine inspection conducted by a Hulun Bir Municipal Party committee between March and May. The report notes the local authorities' failure to carry out higher party committee decisions and includes the following details: insufficient capacity for destroying classified documents, and tons of classified documents were not destroyed on time. The contents of the documents are unknown. It's also questionable how such a huge number of files relating to the virus accumulated in a matter of months. Now we turn to yet another virus cover-up revealed by an internal document we obtained. The document was issued by the Agricultural Market Epidemic Prevention and Control Force in China's Huizhou City. It's located in the southern province of Guangdong. The document says that Chinese Communist Party, or CCP virus, was detected in a package of frozen chicken wings at a major local market. It's been a month since the contamination was detected, but the information was never revealed to the public. A recent internal document from a local public security bureau reaffirms the cover-up. The document details online pandemic information control, and it specifies to maintain pandemic-related information security and confidentiality. Months after speaking out for dissidents that went missing in China, a prominent Chinese publisher is...
O latido constante do seu cão está deixando você louco.
Her friends are now calling for her release. NTD's Juliet Song has the details.
Beijing police detained a prominent publisher along with her husband this Thursday. The publisher is an advocate for dissidents, and her supporters suspect that's what led to her arrest. Her lawyer said authorities charged her with illegal business operations, and that's the only thing he knows so far.
What I want to do the most right now is to see them as soon as possible.
Geng Xiaonan, the publisher, is well known in China's cultural industry. Over the years, she hosted many events for independent artists and scholars. She's also an outspoken advocate for dissidents. After a famous party critic was arrested this July, Geng had been actively calling for his release on social media. She also called for support of citizen journalist Chen Xiushi after he went missing in the middle of covering the epidemic in Wuhan. Geng's friend called her a brave woman.
If prisoners of conscience or outspoken scholars are in trouble, she will speak out for them. She's a courageous, righteous, kind-hearted woman who always knows what's going on.
Her friends are now drawing attention to her arrest on social media, but one of them told NTD that authorities have been trying to silence them. Their social media accounts were shut down.
The authoritarian system in China works just like this. You can't speak the truth. It's like the story of the emperor's new clothes. You can't say the emperor has no clothes on.
Geng's arrest is the latest example of the Chinese regime's effort to crack down on its critics. Also this week, police arrested a family member of a pro-democracy poet. Over 20 police officers took him from his home this June. Later, police also arrested his wife. The poet has 4 children. Up to now, his friends have had no information on his whereabouts. Changchun and Juliet Song, NTD News.
Now we look to other news in the publishing sphere. A new book about the CCP head Xi Jinping will soon be published in China. That's according to Chinese state-run media. The book is said to include many of Xi's speeches and declarations since he took power in 2012. Much of the book reportedly features never-before-seen or published content. Based on inside information, the book also includes one of his speeches from 2019, given during a symposium for teachers about ideological education in schools. In it, he said the purpose of education is to cultivate successors for socialism, and that it's not allowed to produce gravediggers for the communist system. He added that if the education system does create gravediggers for the CCP, it would be considered a failed education. In another speech, this one given in 2014 about socialist ideology, Xi said all universities and colleges must maintain a high degree of consistency with central authorities on major issues. He added it's never permitted to go against the central government. And in 2013, he spoke during China's National Propaganda and Ideological Work Conference. Referring to the West and especially the U.S., he said hostile forces are there to promote the so-called universal values. He claimed the West's goal is to compete with China for battlefields and people's hearts, and finally to overthrow the CCP's leadership and China's socialist system. Chinese authorities are calling on the country's local governments to borrow and spend even more money. It's an effort to boost a struggling economy, but it comes as China continues to suffer a growing debt crisis.
The last time China went through an economic crisis in 2008, the authorities ordered construction of roads, railways, and bridges to pump up the economy. Since then, local authorities and state-owned companies started frantically borrowing money from banks and the public in order to fund the projects. But the problem is, many of the projects didn't turn out to be profitable, and that created China's ever-mounting debt crisis. In 2017, the International Monetary Fund warned China over its dangerous growth by debt strategy. But according to a former Chinese official, the crisis has only gotten worse. Li Chunliang served as the deputy mayor of China's Jixi and Hegang city in the northeastern province of Heilongjiang. He recently left the mainland and joined overseas pro-democracy groups after realizing the corruption of the Communist Party. He's now wanted by Chinese authorities on charges of corruption. His subordinates have been arrested. Li claims innocence and said the regime is retaliating against him for speaking up.
The entire nation, especially in the northeastern region, at all levels of government are financially broken. They are not just near bankruptcy, but are completely bankrupt.
He said every municipal level city has at least 10 or 20 billion yuan in debt. Larger cities can owe over 100 billion yuan, which equals over $14 billion.
A municipal level city's annual income is about several billion Chinese yuan, 2, 3, or 4 billion. But they have tens of billions of yuan in debt. How are they going to pay for it? Eventually, it all became bad debt.
A Chinese institution estimates the local authorities' debt to be nearly $10 trillion. In 2019, over 800 Chinese local authorities and agencies were listed by courts as being in default, meaning they had failed to make repayments, compared to 100 in 2018. Experts have long worried that the mounting debt could threaten the country's financial system and even disrupt the global economy. Liu said the reason many local officials take huge loans to build infrastructure is to polish their own political records. Large-scale construction can boost local GDP as well as offer opportunities for corruption in the bidding process.
They did not start from what would benefit the locals. Everything is fake. Everything is for the purpose of political rewards.
That is, projects are not based on whether they are profitable or useful.
Now a lot of the so-called development zones are ghost towns. Nobody is there. Those are all fake development zones or industrial zones.
Such examples abound. The Chinese city of Tianjin borrowed billions of dollars to build what they call China's Manhattan. Yet till today, the district remains a ghost town with barely any commercial activities. And in the southwest province of Guizhou, a poverty-stricken county borrowed $5.7 billion to build a vanity project. The project is now abandoned. The lives of Chinese people are already being affected by the growing debt.
They just don't report it, but the governments are struggling to pay their employees. Many of the benefits for low-income households are now behind in payments. Especially for many of the unemployed, they don't have any basic support.
Meanwhile, the struggling governments also turned to the Chinese People's Pension Fund for rescue, storing up even more trouble for the future.
The pension funds have run out of money. The new workforce are now sustaining the older ones. What does that mean? It means the young people are now paying for the older people's current pension. The young people won't have any when they retire.
And now the Chinese regime is encouraging even more spending on infrastructure in order to boost the economy that is suffering from the pandemic. A Bloomberg report shows that local authorities will need to sell another 1.5 trillion yuan of bonds in 3 months from August.
Update on India-China relations. The countries said on Friday that they've agreed to de-escalate tensions on their contested Himalayan border and take steps to restore peace and tranquility. That's following a high-level diplomatic meeting in Moscow.
India and China are once again trying to defuse the tense military standoff on their mutual border, with Russia as a mediator. Top diplomats from India and China met in Moscow on Friday and said that they'd agreed to disengage their forces in the Himalayas and de-escalate. 20 Indian troops were killed in a clash in June there, and the most recent incident came this week when both countries accused each other of firing into the air, violating a long-held protocol not to use firearms in the area. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said both countries made a useful decision. The Moscow meeting is the latest diplomatic effort to head off a broader conflict between the world's two most populous countries, which went to war in 1962.
Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen visited an air defense missile base on Friday, where she urged the troops to be steadfast in their defense of the island's sovereignty and democracy.
We will never give up even an inch of our land, and we will firmly protect our democracy and our freedoms.
The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has claimed Taiwan as its own, although it has never ruled the island. This year, the CCP has stepped up its military activity around Taiwan. For 2 days, Chinese forces carried out large-scale air and naval exercises off Taiwan's southwest and in its air defense identification zone. A member of Taiwan's parliament told Taiwanese media outlet United Nations Network that due to the epidemic and international tensions, the Chinese army has been trying to shift the focus of Chinese people by provoking Taiwan. He added Taiwanese people are not afraid of these provocative actions. On the contrary, they will be more opposed to mainland China. Microsoft says foreign countries are increasing cyber attacks targeting the U.S. election. The corporation says its security tools detected and stopped the majority of the attacks.
Microsoft says hackers working for China, Russia, and Iran are targeting the U.S. election and have recently increased their attacks. The firm's vice president of customer security and trust writes, in recent weeks, Microsoft has detected cyber attacks targeting people and organizations involved in the upcoming presidential election, including unsuccessful attacks on people associated with both the Trump and Biden campaigns. Microsoft said Chinese hackers have launched thousands of attacks, successfully compromising about 150 people between March and September. They targeted Democratic nominee Joe Biden's campaign and a person formerly involved with President Trump's administration. Microsoft said a Russian group targeted over 200 organizations, many affiliated with the upcoming U.S. election. The Kremlin dismissed the allegations as nonsense. And Microsoft said Iranian hackers tried to log into the accounts of Trump administration staff and campaign staff. Earlier this year, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a report saying China could pose a greater threat than Russia in 2020. The statement said the Chinese regime is trying to shape policy in the United States, pressure political figures opposed to China's interests, and counter criticism of China.
The National Association of Scholars has released a new report. It lays out how the Chinese Communist Party has worked to strategically corrupt the U.S. education system since at least 2003. The author of the report and other scholars give us a deeper look at the problems. They were on a panel discussion with our sister media, the Epoch Times.
While more than 40 Confucius Institutes have already closed, the Chinese Communist Party has worked for more than a decade to burrow its way in to America's K-12 education system and distort the truth about the regime. Rochelle Peterson from the National Association of Scholars explains in her report that it starts with the College Board, which in her words is corrupted by the CCP from the inside out.
And through this network, the College Board encourages school districts to host Chinese government-selected teachers in K-12 classrooms, often in immersion classes in which Chinese teachers teach not only Chinese language, but also social studies, history, and other subjects the CCP takes a special interest in.
Peterson says the College Board is bought off by the CCP and has been for nearly 2 decades. The College Board also worked with the CCP to develop the AP Chinese Language and Culture course, which high school students can take to earn college credit. One professor says a major problem is that the Communist Party eradicates traditional Chinese culture and replaces it with Communist Party-approved narratives.
Whereas in the Cold War, we were very aware that we didn't want Stalinist literature for our students of Russian language. We wanted them to be reading the Russian classics. And for some reason, we think it's okay for literature and textbooks coming out of communist China to be normalized among our student population. So I think that
Gilly emphasized that the enemy is the CCP rather than the Chinese people. He says that the Chinese people are our allies to recovering and preserving the authentic Chinese culture.
We need to develop alternatives, and we need to root out the pernicious influence of the CCP. We cannot let the next generation of Americans be trained by the Chinese Communist Party.
So how can U.S. citizens make an effort to push back against the CCP's encroachment? The scholars suggest a few approaches. Avoid participation in the CCP-backed AP Chinese courses and demand an alternative. Support the Atheni Act, which calls to withhold taxpayer funds from colleges that have agreements with the CCP. The petition can be found on atheni.org/legislation. And the full report from Rochelle Peterson can be found on nas.org. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Now we turn to the tech industry. U.S. President Trump says the September 20th TikTok deadline would not be expanded. That's when the U.S., as the app's parent company, Chinese developer ByteDance, must sell the app by, lest it face a ban in the U.S. TikTok is a popular short video sharing app. It has risen to popularity with young people in the U.S. and other countries outside China since its launch in 2017. In order to meet Trump's deadline, it needs to find a U.S. buyer in the next 10 days. Now we turn to a former Chinese Communist Party insider who dared to criticize Chinese leader Xi Jinping. She's making headlines again by suggesting ways the Communist Party could fall. We sat down with the Epoch Times China editor Annie Wu to find out more. Hello, Annie. Thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you back.
Thank you, Tiffany, for having me.
So there's a post that's garnering attention in China by a former professor for the Central Party School of the Chinese Communist Party, Cai Xia. So who is this professor?
Yes, so Cai Xia is a former professor of politics at this party school, which trains young cadres to become party members. And so she's quite powerful and influential within the party system because she has such a high position. So actually recently in June, an audio recording of her speech during a private gathering of party elite leaked online, and people heard her talking about the party and criticizing it, saying that it was at its dead end and that it should be fundamentally abandoned. And she also criticized the leader of the Communist Party himself, Xi Jinping, called him a mafia boss. And so this kind of garnered a lot of attention within the online community in China and also within the party itself. So much so that recently she actually was expelled from the party. The party made an announcement and said that she will no longer be part of the party, and she will also have her retirement benefits revoked.
So you mentioned that she was expelled, and after that she wrote a post in which she put forward 3 ways in which she thinks the Chinese Communist Party could fall. So can you expand on those 3 ways?
Sure. So the first point she made was that the Chinese regime's actions could garner such attention from the international community that the entire world unites to fight against the Chinese regime, similar to Hitler during the Nazi Germany, or with Gaddafi with the Syrian conflict. And in so doing, the party also itself has its agenda in which the Chinese people could feel united against foreign enemies, while people are essentially distracted from the internal problems within the country. And the second proposal that she put out was that the party could potentially reform itself, and similar to during the Soviet Union under Gorbachev, there were reforms initiated, it could itself bring about the collapse of the party. And the third point she made was that there could be so much internal fighting within the party that all this conflict brings about the collapse of the party itself.
And so going on her second point about internal party reform, how likely is that to succeed?
Yes, so many Chinese people actually hoped that the party would reform and liberalize along with the way its economy has adopted some capital market reforms. But the reality is the party has in fact become increasingly more hardlined in the way it controls many facets of Chinese society. And so people like Cai Xia and other party elites or people who were part of the democracy movement in the 1980s during the Tiananmen Square protests also feel that reform isn't really possible under these circumstances. The party essentially will need to collapse in order for China to welcome democratic reforms.
So Cai Xia is known as what's called a party princeling, as in she comes from a family that was very prominent in the party. And so a lot of people are viewing like her turning her back on the party as an example of her third point. So can you expand on that a bit?
Yes, being that Cai Xia is within the party system, it is very rare for someone of such high stature to so publicly condemn the party. So many China analysts believe that her being so public in her dissent against the party is also evidence of the disagreements within the party and how the future of their ruling can become.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Annie. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Tiffany.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time.